Hello there. This is just a bite-sized peek into our comprehensive back-end development course, and I'm all about sharing snippets like this on our YouTube free of charge, so sit back and enjoy the video. But if you're interested in diving deeper, why not consider a Covalence community membership for just $25 a month? It's your golden ticket to a full-stack learning experience, curating all of these videos into a comprehensive course, complete with lecture notes, reference sheets, and challenging labs that are really going to push your learning into overdrive. But the perks don't end there. You're going to unlock the keys to our front end and our React, or my React course as well. Not to mention you're going to have access to live Discord support, meaning you can harass me all you want, exclusive coding events, plus professional assistance for crafting killer portfolios and resumes. Just think of it as your personal coding toolkit, ready and waiting to help you build your future. So check the description down below for a link, and remember, whether you're here for a casual browse or a deep dive, just enjoy the video. Hello there, intrepid students. Welcome to this video walkthrough, series of videos that's going to help you actually connect what we've learned in MySQL over to a TypeScript Express project. So again, we've learned all the fundamentals: creating schemas, using schemas, creating tables, inserting data to those tables, updating and deleting and selecting data from those tables, foreign key and primary keys, the various join statements, the various relationships, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, aggregate functions, having and group by clauses, all this crazy stuff. But all this siloed, bubbled off information we've learned in MySQL and in the last all these lectures, videos, and labs in the MySQL video lectures here in the backend and database courses. How do we take all that and finally get it populating, for example, in a GET request to an API endpoint in our Express TypeScript code? Well, that's what this series is going to aim to do. We're going to start with the simplest of the simple. I want to make sure that y'all understand the simple process of connecting and handshaking and querying some data and even just getting it to pop up in a console log. So for this video, I have a simple schema I'll be using called Node.connect with. I'm going to use that schema as well. I'm going to make sure it's using it right there. I've created a table. I've inserted these 10 users, and if I select star from users, I get all 10 of these simple users. So our goal in this video is, can I run this query in a Node project? Can it query data from this table in this schema? And can it populate a console log, that's it, of this information right here? That is the goal. Right, so I will have this MySQL code available in Gravity right below this video, so you can copy and paste it into your own workbench, create and use the schema, create the table, blah, 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 and follow along with me directly. But know that this is going to be a fundamental concept that will work for any of your projects. So if you want to use a project you already have, like our Chirper labs or my Star Wars labs we've done in this course so far, go ahead and just use those if you don't want to make another new schema with a bunch of new bunk data, for example. It doesn't matter, but if you want to follow along with me directly, I will have this available below the video. So that's the goal. Take this, query it in Node, console log these 10 people. That's the goal. So back over to our terminals. So whether you're in your Mac terminal, Z shell or bash, whether you're on Windows Commander or whatever shell you prefer here, let's get going. I'm going to go ahead and make a new directory. We're going to call it MySQL Fun, unless my other video takes forgot to delete it. We're good. I'm going to go ahead and cd into that directory here as well, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a Node project by running npm init-y, answering yes to all that gobbledygook who cares for learning purposes. I'm going to go ahead and install a package called MySQL 2. Now, you might be wondering, Luke, what about MySQL 1? Maybe you've encountered questions and answers or code snippets in our Discord or here in Gravity referencing MySQL and not MySQL 2. Or again, you watched one of my YouTube videos where I built a full stack app and I did it with MySQL. Doesn't matter. MySQL, you can use just fine even with newer versions of MySQL Server, but there are some workarounds and caveats you have to be aware of, whereas MySQL 2 is the spiritual successor of MySQL 1 with new utilities and promises and things like that added, as well as support for new authentication standards. So in your MySQL workbench, you can actually go to your Information tab. Sorry, I can't zoom in on it here, but your Information tab and your Session tab down there, which will show you your server info right here that will show you the version of MySQL that you are using. So right there is how you can take a look at the version you're using. I'm on 8.0.x. If you're installed as recently, you're probably on 8.1.x or even higher. That's fine. They use a new authentication protocol, a new way of storing passwords we register with MySQL Server compared to older versions, for example, 5.6 or 5.7.x. Doesn't matter if you're on an older version, if you happen to install one. That's what most online instances of MySQL use, by the way. They use the 5.x version. You're not going to encounter a lot of problems unless you're talking about character sets and collation and stuff like that. I'll get into that later. But making a user with a password could vary depending on what library you use. And again, MySQL 2 is equipped to handle both the old and the new password storing protocols, whereas the MySQL library itself only handles the old password storing protocol. So you have to make sure you're aware of that. You'll see like auth not supported error or something like that. If you encounter that, Google your way to victory, or just ping us in Discord and I'll be happy to help, or just ask a question down in Gravity and that way everyone else can see your question and my answer to it. But we're going to be using the MySQL 2 library since it handles both the old and the new authentication protocol. So there we go. We have it installed and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and touch a db.js file. We're going to do our work out of that and run Node on that file to console log and take a look at what we got going on. I'm going to open VS Code and we're going to pop into db.js and we're going to begin writing out the basics of our code. So in newer versions of Node, eventually import and export syntax will just be natively supported. I'm pretty sure the newest LTS does have it, but I'm going to go ahead and keep it old school and as simple and straightforward as possible. Again, I want to show you all the absolute bare bones fundamentals before adding TypeScript, before adding Express and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to bring in all of the MySQL 2 library under the variable MySQL by simply writing a require statement to bring in all that juicy, fun stuff it has for us right there under that variable. That's it. Now, typically here is where you write the following. We're going to write const connection, a variable name we make up. It could just as easily be pizza for all that we really care. In the MySQL library, there is a function called create connection that allows us to, surprise, create a connection from our Node project here to our database in MySQL server. This create connection function takes an object as its parameter, and this object has, at minimum, I believe, 4 required properties to properly connect to a database. One is called our host, one is our user, one is our password, and one is our database, aka our schema. So these are the 4 minimum properties, and as you can see, they all take string values that will be filled in here in just a moment. Their order, remember in JavaScript objects, order of keys is not important, just that they're unique and findable. So the keys are important, but I don't care if you do it like in this order versus this order, it doesn't matter. Okay, so the host is going to be our local host. That is our local development server, the MySQL server that my computer and your computer is running on its own, the one we installed and ran on our startup. This could also be a URL link to a deployed server online when you learn about provisioning online databases. The database key is going to be filled in with the name of the schema you wish this connection to connect to. In my video's case, it will be called Node_connect, the name of the schema I made and used in my workbench. I'm going to paste that inside of there. This will also be the name of the schema from a previous lab if that's what you're doing while walking along through this video with me. So in my case, it's Node_connect. Okay, now user and password. Now, you could use your root user here and your root password, but that is not advisable from a security standpoint. The root user can create other users, other administrative users. The root user can write new schemas. They can delete schemas. They can add new tables, delete tables. They can insert. They can do everything. They can do every query we'd ever want to do. So if this was a real world project and we had our root user credentials leaked online by mistake, someone can grab those credentials, have access to our root user, and cause untold havoc on our entire database, which would be... That's like nuclear scenario. That's like, well, I've just nuked the production database. I'm screwed now. So we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be instead making a new user with a new password that will have the ability to only really do stuff on the Node Connect schema and nowhere else. That way, if a worse doomsday scenario happens where our DB connection credentials are leaked online, the worst that can happen in a production environment is they will mess with the Node Connect schema, which in our case is kind of stupid and simple anyway. But again, that's a much better idea to make a user with a very fine scope instead of one with a very massive scope that can do a whole lot of stuff, because if they're breached, they can do a whole lot of damage. If we have a small scoped user and that's breached, they can do a smaller amount of damage, but damage nonetheless. So it's all about minimizing damages by making sure we have a user and password that connect to Node Connect only, and they can only run queries on this table or this database and its associated tables, and nothing else. It can't create new users. It can't do all that kind of crap that will be bad news bears for us, the developers, right? But remember, in this local dev environment, not that big of a deal. Okay, so to do that, we are going to go back to our workbench, and we can actually go to our navigator and click on users and privileges and do this via point and click. But I'm going to try remembering how to write the actual MySQL syntax for it itself so I can talk about some nuances to creating a new user. So surprise, surprise, our syntax is called create user. Create user takes two strings separated by an @ symbol like that. And the first set of strings is the name of the user we're making. I'm going to call mine node_user, unless I already have that in my list. I hope I don't. But this string value of node_user is the same one that's going to correspond to over here. It's a name you're making up. Make it somewhat make sense so you know what this user is connected to and what they're going to be doing in your projects. Next will be the host it's connected at, which is at localhost in our case. Then we have to register a password for this user, which will be done in this second string here. I'll go ahead and do password123 to make it super secure. In the real world, I recommend you use a better password than this. Use your password generators out there and things like that to save and store a more complex password than this. But nevertheless, that's the value that goes over here. Now, just creating this user, run the command, boom, it ran with the green check mark. And you'll see 0 rows affected. That's the output we're going to see, even though it made the user. So it made the user, but as of right now, it doesn't have permissions or privileges to do anything at all. We've just created it and made it with a new password. And remember, plain text passwords are not what's stored behind the scenes of MySQL server. They encrypted the password, so if something happens, someone can't just take all our usernames and all our passwords. And again, that's where that authentication protocol comes in. Now, if you are on using, actually no, comments in SQL or what? Hashtags? My bad. Yeah. MySQL server version, let's say 5.x. If you're using MySQL server version 5.x and you are identified by, this is called the old authentication standard, works with MySQL and MySQL 2. If you are on MySQL server version 8.x or 8.1 or 8.0, is it 8.x? Works. Then works with MySQL, but not MySQL. No, works with MySQL 2, but not MySQL. My bad. So that's the problem with the newer versions. In 8.x, it uses a new auth standard that MySQL 2 is equipped to handle, but MySQL is not. So if you happen to be using, if you use MySQL server 5x with MySQL, you have to take identified by and add something before it. You write, I believe it's identified with and then by. Yeah, so you write identified with MySQL native password. Let me add this to a new line. Okay, so after writing these comments here, again, this shouldn't be an issue if you've installed recently. So remember, MySQL 5x and under will work with MySQL 2 and MySQL just fine. If you are on 8x, MySQL 2 works just like we've written right here, but not with the original MySQL library. So again, this walkthrough, that shouldn't be a problem. But should you find yourself in a scenario in the real world where you're working with the MySQL library, aka not MySQL 2, not the one we installed here, so if you're working with MySQL 1 as a dependency, and you're using a 5x server, then you have to write or if you're using, an 8x server with MySQL, which is the old school one. So many mistakes. So clarify, server 8, and you're working with old school MySQL and not MySQL 2. You say create user node, whatever, at localhost, identified with the old password standard by this password value. So you add with MySQL native password before by, and that will create the user that will get around that error you might see if we used MySQL. But again, this is a hypothetical. You do not need to write this for this video. What I wrote down on line 31 now is completely fine for the MySQL 2 library and both old and new versions of MySQL. So there we go. We're totally fine. Now, the next part I'm writing, grant privileges. We're granting privileges of all kinds. We're going to say node_connect.*. So this is dbname.tables that this user, node user, will have privileges on. So we are saying that all tables under Node Connect, we don't want to write asterisk here because that would be like making a new root user. We don't want this user to have the ability or privileges to do anything on all databases and all tables. We want it only on the Node Connect schema database and the tables found within. And this is where we write all those mess ups today. The same code we wrote here, new node user at localhost. There we go. So that right there is going to be the privileges we are granting to this user, right? So the user we created in the line above, give them privileges only on Node Connect and all tables associated with it. That's that dot asterisk. So if we had more than just users, that dot asterisk says all tables with the Node Connect schema. Run that command. I got an illegal command here, so I forgot something. I think I forgot to write grant all privileges. That's what I forgot to write. Yeah, now we get a green check mark. Always something, y'all. This means grant all privileges, which actually is all in double quotes because it doesn't actually grant all privileges. It grants all querying capabilities, except for creating new users that have more authority. So, like, we can't have Michael Scott making new executives for Dunder Mifflin. He can only hire people below his branch manager status, such as salespeople, accounting, etc. He cannot hire executives above his hierarchy in the Dunder Mifflin company. So we've made him Michael Scott here, and by saying grant all privileges, we have made sure that he has all privileges on Scranton branch and not all branches, so he can't mess with Utica and things like that. So that's what we're doing here. We're honing in the scope of this user. So again, if a breach happens, the only damage they can do is on the Node Connect schema and nothing else. And then this is not as required these days, but having written SQL for a while, I tend to just write this always. Whenever I mess with privileges, it's like making sure I hit a refresh button, a turning my computer off and on again scenario, making sure that I flush privileges here to make sure I refresh everything and it's ready to go and updated. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm set up with all your new connections here. So with any luck, we should have available our connected user over in our node code here. So right over back in our node code in db.js, we have our host, we have our user and password we just made. We gave them privileges. We refreshed our server to make sure it's aware that this user is made with privileges. And we've connected to this database right here. So theoretically, our connection should be established. And we can finally test this by writing the following. The create connection makes the connection and stores it back into our variable that has methods that listen on it for certain events that we can take advantage of. So we can say, when the connection successfully connects to our database, I want you to run the following callback function, right? I want it to run the following. This function will run when our connection establishes a connection to our database. It will provide you an error should one occur. So what we're going to do is we're going to write if error, throw error, because we should have some like proper error handling and graceful shutdowns in our project. I'm just showing you that's, for example, something we could do here. I'm going to console log error connecting to DB and just display the error along with that console log. Otherwise, I'm going to console log connected to MySQL server. Semicolon parentheses. There we go. That's all I want it to do. So now we're going to run node on this file, and with any luck, we should have node on db.js, a connection to our server. So that right there, you can see it's connected to our server, and we don't have nodemon installed, but we're going to notice here that that new terminal prompt did not appear, meaning we've established the connection and we're holding on to it. So that's part of that process where you make the connection, grab the connection, connect to the database, run some data, release the connection so the next person can connect and run to it, for example. We'll talk about that more in later videos, but for now, I want to keep it fairly straightforward. So let's see what else we could do here. So we should be able to start doing whatever we want with our connections now. So let's see if I can. Let's see how we can actually take this and begin adding an actual query into it. Right. So like I was saying, we have our connection established in our database. And that's a good step, right? Like we have our user created and clearly it's successfully connecting to our database. This is where if you got a connection error saying like auth not supported or something like that, that means you ran into one of these issues up here. But again, if you're following along with my most recent videos, you shouldn't have this problem. But again, just reach out and ping me in Discord if you do, and I'll be happy to help you out and see where something went wrong by asking you 20 questions. Okay, so in old school versions of MySQL connections, you would have to establish a connection to your database, and once you have that connection established, that is when you would run the following code. You would run connection.query, and surprise, surprise, connection.query is the function that takes a string value such as select star from users, the goal of this entire video, that will then run the following command, and then afterwards it provides us a callback function to execute upon an error occurring or it's successfully grabbing the results of this query. So the order of parameters are error and results. I'm going to write some new lines and copy and paste the exact same error handling I had from the connection.connect. Otherwise, we're going to console log our results, and that's what we're looking at to do here. So this is what it would look like, and then you have to end the connection as well. So you have to end the connection and make sure that you're not like holding on to it and listening for a query that's never gonna actually happen. So you would have to, this is called the handshaking process of connect, query, when it's finished, whether with an error or results, you would end the connection after that, right? So you would end that connection. Meaning I would write something like, probably after the query happens, you would write connection.end to actually end that, and you'd write your function inside of here, etc. So we'll say that's more old school, and you should know how that works, right? I would have the whole same error happen here, although it shouldn't say error connecting. This should say error querying to DB. This one would say error ending or error closing to the DB, and we'd console log connection closed. So MySQL 2 is smart in that if you don't have this connection connect, if you don't have this connection end, MySQL 2 is smart enough with just a connection query to connect, run the query, and end the connection. So we're going to actually do it the way we're supposed to. Write the connection, handle the error if it happens, give ourselves a message saying it connected. Kate that connected connection, run a query. Inside of here, inside of the query, I'm going to say end the connection after it's over, so that way we can prepare for the next one or something like that. So this is, again, a more old school process, and I'll strip it back here in just a moment to show you all how it needs to work at its simplest. But this is what we're looking at here, so let's go ahead and see if we can get it running. We're going to run node on db.js, and we got it. Look at the order of operations. We established a connection to our server, we ran a query, we got the data, and then we console logged it, and then we stopped the connection, and we are now good to go with another run through right here. Y'all, this is awesome stuff, right? We got going on right now. This is super cool. But check it out. We ran a select star from users, and what do we get? We got an array of objects. So the MySQL and MySQL 2 library will take a select statement and always return arrays of objects, and those objects will represent whatever we select from our table. So in my users table case, it is all data, ID, name, email, created ad. But if we wanted just the IDs and names, we could always do select ID, comma name from users. Let's see what that does for us. If I rerun the connection, just those values right there. If I want to run a single one, I can say where ID equals 2, for example. And that now allows me to get just that one. But notice what a select where ID equals 2 gave me. It still gave me an array with an object inside of it. Let's see what happens if I run a bad query. I don't have a user ID 11, so let's see what happens there. Remember, that's not an error. That just means it found nothing in the select statements. That's not an error. It just means it gets you an empty array. So an array of possible table objects is what I want you all to think of that results as. An array of possible table objects from selects is what you're going to see inside of that. And there we go. That right there is what you need to do to establish a connection, get it connected, and, well, get this code up and running at its simplest. Before I end this walkthrough, I did tell you that this connection connect and connection end stuff is required in an old school perspective, but again, modern versions of the MySQL 2 library are smart enough to grab the connection, run the query, and end it for you without doing all that gobbledygook. So let's go back to simply select star from users. And inside of here, just run this to confirm that it still works just fine. But as you can see, without that connection end, it's sitting there and waiting for additional code because it didn't actually end the connection, which is interesting. It grabs it but doesn't end it. So it's good to know. It's good to know. So we can always just do connection.end in our raw code here to make sure that the automatic grabbing of the connection and the ending part is now correctly streamlined. So yeah, I said it was more old school, but it looks like even with MySQL 2, you still have to end your connection. And if you're wondering, Luke, that's going to be really annoying to remember to write over and over again. It will, but there are other ways of making connections that automatically handle the handshake process for you. But it is very important that you fundamentally understand that handshaking process. Take the connection credentials, connect to database connection established. Run query, get results, and connection to database. Because again, in a real world project, you might have different users all querying tons of different, as in like these kinds of users. Run for inserts, running updates, running deletes, running selects, running these kinds of selects, all that crazy stuff. We don't want one connection being all these connections connected to our database and our database having like a gorillion connections to it all at one time because it's going to not scale and crash. That's why you have a limited number of connections, like sometimes 10, that will connect and end as needed. So almost like you have 10 lanes you have to work with, and you don't want to start adding just one more lane, bro. You want to end those connections so you don't keep adding new lanes. You want to work in the same 10 lanes and just queue your traffic into those 10 lanes as appropriately as possible. That's why we have to remember this process here. So selects always return a array of possible table objects, right? So whatever your selected properties will always be an object from the users table, aka one row in an array of them. What about inserting a new user? I'm going to take my insert statement from over here. I'm going to copy and paste it into my code. I'm going to say insert into users, ID, name, email, value. And I'm going to hard code some values here. So 3 sets of strings, double quotes. Because I use single quotes on the outside there, I have to use double quotes on the inside. I will say new ID of 11. Yeah, we'll do 11. Name, let's do, oh God, I can think of a Mario character, right? Let's do Toad. Let's do Toad in this mess. We're gonna say Toad at Nintendo.com. So we have insert into users, ID, name, email, 11. This should be a number, not a string or a varchar. Toad and Toad at Nintendo.com. So let's go ahead and insert this data and see what results gets us this time. So results got us an object of the following properties. Field count, affected rows. That's a really good one to know. If our affected rows is high, is a number of more than 1, that means clearly we inserted one or more things. So affected rows is a very good property to know, right? So that one's going to be important. So clearly, inserts always return. I should have done multiple lines for this. There. An object that has affected rows of type number. It has insert ID. So insert ID number, if we're using MySQL's auto increment system, this will return the ID that it automatically incremented and inserted for us. So no, insert ID is useful when dealing with auto increment. Useful for auto increment primary keys. Then we also have things like change rows and warning status, which could be useful to us depending on what we're doing. I typically use affected rows and insert ID the most, so I figured I would show y'all what those look like. So inserts return an object with at least these 4 properties for y'all to take a look at, but it clearly has more. And as a matter of fact, update and delete always return this object as well. So if your update and delete statements have an affected rows of 1 or more, that means you have probably successfully ran a query. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? So let's actually mess up something here. What if I say insert into users with a Z and run this query? This should have an error of some kind. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so error, and it crashed. We threw the error, and it says table node connect users doesn't exist. So we clearly mess up the table name. Easy enough to fix. What if I forget one of my column names in my insert statement? Column count doesn't match value count. That is a classic error of this column count doesn't match this value count. So we're going to have to go back and add that there. Let's say I did this as user ID 12, and we're going to add Captain Falcon as a new character. but I'm going to do string quotes 12 because you saw me catch that earlier. Let's say I didn't catch that as an error right here. Run the code. Did it work? No crap. I didn't think it was going to work. Okay, it was smart enough to take that varchar right there and convert it to an int for me. So kudos to a modern library taking bad code and correcting it for us. That's interesting right there, because I don't think that would work in actual code, would it? In the actual workbench. Now I'm just curious. Now we're exploring together in the video. 13 test at Nintendo.com. It does work. That is highly, even though it's an integer. So yeah, that's surprising. It can take that value, and I guess because it converts to an integer, it can convert it fine for us. So it's not a MySQL library thing. It's just a MySQL server thing. I would never have guessed that would do like some kind of auto parsing from a string or a varchar or a char value over to an integer value. But hey, the more you learn something new. What are you gonna do? Yeah, so I want to show y'all what those look like. Updates and deletes also get that object, which we sometimes call the MySQL OK packet in TypeScript terms, or sometimes it's called result set header here in MySQL 2. It's good to know that's what it's called because that's what we use when determining certain workflows in our API endpoints. So that's enough for this video. I want to show y'all at minimum that bare bones code of how to get that select star thing running. So let's go back to it real quick. Select star from users. Bada bing, bada boom. There we go. And that's it. This is the minimum code we need to properly establish a connection, run a query, and end that connection to make sure that we understand this fundamental process before I begin adding TypeScript and before I begin adding Express into the mix. So keep this code you have written because the next video walkthrough is going to continue expanding from this. So don't delete this, and I won't delete this between my videos either. So keep this code written as is because we're going to be expanding upon it in the next walkthrough, and I'll see y'all there.